you use different parts of your brain for writing and editing, and it's really advisable. If you keep changing, if you keep going back during one writing session and changing sentences, this way lies disaster, and you never finish, and it makes you more frustrated than anything else.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torok. My guest today is Helen Wilkie. Here's 3 facts I think you should know about Helen. 1, she was born and raised in Scotland. She spent most of her adult life in Canada, and she's now happily settled in Argentina. Oh, and on a side note, she's an enthusiastic tango dancer, and she can't wait to get back to dancing when this pandemic is over. Second fact about Helen, she was a professional speaker from the mid-90s until 2018, and that's when she moved full-time into the world of books. She's written over a dozen books of her own, and her business is now helping business executives get your books written. And third fact about Helen is that she takes a huge amount of pleasure watching someone go from, I know I should write a book, but have no idea where to start, to holding the published book in their hand and with their name on it. Helen Wilkie, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Thank you, George. I'm delighted to be here with you.
And I'm delighted to talk with you and especially connecting to you in Argentina. Now, my podcast is really going exotic here.
Yes.
Helen, you are a specialist. You're a specialist in words. You're both a speaker and a writer, and always been a specialist in words. You help executives write their book, so you're become like a ghostwriter. And tell me, why do you believe it's important for executives? And we're talking about people who have accomplished something, have a career behind them. Why do you think it might be a benefit for them to publish a book?
Well, just before I tell you that, let me just add that I'm not only a ghostwriter. Ghostwriting is just one of the things that I do. More than that, I am a book coach. So the people are usually still writing their own books, and I'm just coaching them through the process. So the question is, why would they write a book? I believe that the main reason that successful senior executives should write a book is to safeguard their legacy. Because in most cases, they may have built a company right from scratch, or they may have taken over something maybe from a family member like their father or the mother and taken it over, and then they've added their mark to it. They've put their mark on it in some way. And it may not even be a business. It might be some form of charity. Whatever it is that they've built is their legacy. And I believe that that needs to be safeguarded, because if you don't tell the story, it may never be told, or somebody else will tell it and it won't be right. So the only way, in my view, the best way to make sure that that doesn't happen is to write a book about your company, how you built it, its origins. It may have a lot of personal aspects to it, or it may not. But basically, it tells the story of how your organization, your legacy came to be, so that it's preserved in the way that you want it to be. So in other words, the book is not the legacy. What you built is the legacy, but the book is your way of making sure that its story is told correctly.
And sometimes, unless we put our story down in writing, it gets forgotten.
It does. I mean, people, generations change, and you know, new people come on board and they don't remember the founders, and then the next generation doesn't remember them at all, and they're in the far distant future. They become almost mythical figures if they're even remembered at all. But how the effect they had on the company and its values and its vision and so on is forgotten, unless the founder or whoever it is that is writing the story puts it down. And I believe that most people care enough about their legacy to care that it's properly preserved and told.
And told with all the warts as well.
Yes, that's important. And people, in a book, for example, people want to read that. They want to read about the disasters and the near disasters and what was done to avert disaster, or even sometimes when it wasn't. People want, that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it real life.
And take, for example, someone like Steve Jobs. He'll certainly always be remembered for building Apple. He won't be forgotten. However, it was still worthwhile. I found it worthwhile to read his story, the book about his life, because that gave some insight into the person, into his certainly his flaws. And he was a genius and a very successful man, but he was flawed like the rest of us. And that probably helps us better understand them. And maybe when we see someone who's so big like Steve Jobs, we think, well, I'm never going to be like Steve Jobs. Well, wait a minute. Yes, I am. I have some flaws just like him. So maybe there's hope for me. Exactly.
And I think everybody who knows anything about Steve Jobs knows that he was a flawed individual, and he probably was hell to work for. And at the same time, he gets respect for his legacy, which is Apple.
Helen, you've published books of your own, and you've worked with executives, and you pointed out that you're more than a ghostwriter. You're a book coach.
Yes.
And so when someone comes to you and say, Helen, I've got this idea, I want to talk about this company I built, or I want to talk about my career in this corporation and the projects and what I went through, because it's a story I think that people can learn from. When they come to you, what's their obstacle that gets in the way the most, that you need to help them clear out?
Well, they express it in different ways, and sometimes people will tell you it's one thing when it really isn't. It's really something else. And the number one thing that people say is, I don't have time, which of course is everybody's excuse for everything. But when it comes right down to it, through the conversation, it's usually more that they don't know where to start, and they're not sure that they can do it. Even somebody and I don't teach people how to write. The people who come to me are already, they're senior executive people. They know how to write. They just don't know how to write a book. And so their confidence level about writing an entire book isn't quite where they would like it to be. So they're not sure where to start or how to do it really. And so that's what they tell me at the beginning. I have no idea where to start. And that's why I'm here. That's why they hire me, to help them sort out the process.
So what might be a good start? What do you say, or what do you ask that gets them started?
Well, the first question I always ask is, why are you writing this book? What's the book about, and why are you writing this book? Because writing a book is a big undertaking, no matter, and even if I'm ghostwriting your book, I still need a lot of your time and input in order to write it. And so it's a big undertaking, and there will be times during the process where you'll be thinking, why did I do this? What have I gotten myself into? I don't want to finish this. So you need a really good reason to do the book. And because everybody says I should write a book is the worst reason in the world, because it's easy for somebody else to say, but you're the one that has to do it. So you have to have a really good reason to do it. Now, some people do it, it depends at the stage that they're at. For example, if you have somebody who's in mid-management or is an entrepreneur who wants to sell, to market something, even to market their expertise, quite often they will write a how-to book, or they will write a book that focuses on their area of expertise. And you and I, George, as speakers, know that this is what we have done in the past. And so you write a book on how to do whatever it is your area of expertise is, and then somebody reads it and they want to do it, but they think, I really need some help here. I should hire this person. And that's where your book becomes, a marketing tool. That's one reason. Sometimes people write memoirs for more personal reasons than anything else. Just before I left Canada, I did a memoir for a lady who was just about to turn 90. And her family had given her my service as her 90th birthday gift. And a number of times during the conversation, she said to me, my family doesn't know anything about this. I've never told them these stories before. And so that's why she wanted to do it, just so that her family would know what she was about. And then there's the people who say, as we've already talked about, they've reached the pinnacle of their career and they want to remember it and they want to have it remembered well. And so that's why they write the book. And so that brings you back, brings your focus back when you start to lose interest, or when you get into what we call the muddy middle. It kind of brings you back because you remember, I'm writing this because. And so that's the first question that I always ask everybody at the beginning of the process. And until they've got that clear in their mind, there really is no way to proceed successfully.
Helen, writing a book is, from my experience, it's certainly more than a weekend project. When clients come to you and they say, well, how long do you think it's going to take? What do you tell them?
Well, we usually have a fairly lengthy conversation about this. And partly it depends on to a large extent, it depends on how much time the person has and is prepared to put into the book. Because at the beginning, in the first conversation that we have during the coaching process, we figure out how are they going to actually get the time to do this writing. And that starts with how long is the book going to be? And of course, most people haven't a clue. So I send them to Amazon or I send them to the local bookstore and I say, pick a book off the shelf and see how many pages are in it and multiply it by 250 and it'll give you a rough idea of how many words are in that book. So there we start with, when do you want it finished? When do you want your manuscript to be finished? How many words is it going to be have? And then it's arithmetic. This is how many words you'll have to write every day or every week. And often people underestimate that. They say, I'll say to them, well, okay, that means you're going to have to write 2,000 words a day. And they say, oh, I could do that. And I say, well, let's think about that. Are you sure? If you're a professional author who's using this as a full-time occupation, okay. But if you're a busy executive or any kind of person who has a job, the chances are good that you're not going to be able to write 2,000 words a day. And so you need to, my next question is to them, okay, whatever the number they come up with, how are you going to fit this into your life? Tell me, are you going to write it in small chunks of 15 minutes in what we call the cracks of the day? Or are you going to devote an hour in the morning? Or are you going to use your commuting time to do it? You need to know exactly how you're going to produce these words throughout the time. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, the question was, how long might it take?
Oh, right. I'm sorry. So,
and do you give them a time frame?
Yes, I do. And it comes out of this process. This is why I started talking about the process, because it comes out of that. And so I did have one client who did a book in 3 months once, but it wasn't really coaching. It was more like heavy editing because she had done a fair amount of the writing in advance, and she was a speaker and she had a big important speaking engagement 3 months down the road, and so she did it because she knew she had to do it. But that is very aggressive. I usually say to people, let's shoot for 6 months, and if it takes a little longer than that, that's fine, but let's shoot for 6 months. If you come in earlier, excellent, but don't set yourself up for failure. In fact, I had one client who quit in the middle of the process because he burnt himself out. And I told him at the beginning that this is what was going to happen. No, 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 he said, I can do it. Well, he couldn't. So, you know, at least give yourself 6 months. On the other side, don't give yourself 2 years, because the longer you take as your deadline, the less work you're prepared to do on it to get it done.
Yeah, if you say, I'll do it in 2 years, you probably do nothing in the first 6 months.
Exactly. Yeah. Although in the process, that's why you hire somebody like me, because the process is designed to keep you writing.
And so let's work through the coaching you do when you work with someone who's writing their book. So they have some writing skills. They've learned how to write. They might not be a Stephen King, but they have some writing skills, and you coach them through. So you're not coaching them on writing skills. What are you coaching them on?
I'm coaching them to get the book written. I'm coaching them through the process. This is the antidote to the people who say, I don't have time, I don't know where to start, and then they put it off. So with this process, the way at the beginning, on the first interview that we had, and it's all done by Zoom, a combination of Zoom and email. And so the first conversation we have is the one that I just described to you about, how long is it to be and so forth. And at the end of that, you will know how many words you're going to write each week. And once that's decided, and you commit to that. So if you say let's say it's 2,000 words a week, then you submit those words to me once a week on a day that we decide. So on Friday, if it's a Friday morning, you commit to send me 2,000 words. And I don't necessarily do anything with it at the time, but you send it to me. If I don't get it, then I will be following up with you to find out what happened to the words, when am I going to get them. So there's little pushing and prodding done there. And so you do that every week. And then twice a month, like every 2 weeks, we have a Zoom call. And that goes on for 1.5 hours to 2 hours, depending. And that's when we review what you've sent me. So I actually review it myself before we have the Zoom call, and I make notes and some ideas about whether I think maybe this is a little muddy thinking here, or maybe this is not quite clear, sort of really advice more. It's like director's notes more than anything else. And at that point, we don't do a lot of nitty-gritty editing. It's more big picture at this point, and it's more get it down. And I encourage people not to do any editing until the first draft is done. Having said that, I will confess that when I'm writing, I do sometimes edit in between because I can, but it's not, you use different parts of your brain for writing and editing, and it's really advisable. If you keep changing, if you keep going back during one writing session, and changing sentences, this way lies disaster, and you never finish, and it makes you more frustrated than anything else. Whereas if you get your words down, even if they're all going to be changed in the end, if you get your words down, then it encourages you to go on the next day and write 2,000 more words.
Interesting.
So it's an ongoing process, but that's kind of the shape of the month. 4 times you send me your words, and twice a month we talk on Zoom to review how you're doing and how you're progressing through the process.
Interesting that you mentioned the word encouraging, because I know from my own experience writing my first book how important the encouragement was, because and now here's interesting relating to the time factor. First of all, the first book I wrote with Peter Ersbender, my mentor, Secrets of Power Marketing was the book. And we first got together, we agreed on the process, who was going to do what and what the schedule was. And we agreed on that the original time frame was going to be 6 months. It took 2 years.
Yeah.
It just took 2. And the point is, once the book is written, nobody cares how long it took.
No.
No one says, oh, how long did it take to write this? No one cares. And however, the encouraging factor was important, because for me, on your first book, I didn't believe it would become a book until the last month. All that time up to then, it was just words. It was just pieces, that was fitting together, but I still didn't believe it was a book. And it was
Right.
in that last month, and the home stretch, it's kind of like, you're running a marathon and you're beat, and then you come around the corner and you see the finish line there, and suddenly you got a burst of energy. And that's what it was for me. That last month, I could see the finish line. I knew it was going to be a book, but for the months leading up to that, I didn't believe it was going to be a book. And
Believe that. I get that, George. And one thing I just should say is that one of the reasons maybe that it took you 2 years is it was a collaboration. It always takes longer when there's more than one author, when you're doing the process together, even though you planned how you were going to do it. But still, a collaboration does take longer. The other thing about that feeling that you had about it not being real is that there are 3 different types of energy that you need to write a book. The first one is very exciting because that's starting energy. And you figure, finally, I'm getting started with this book, and there's a process, and there's somebody like me helping you along, and so on. And it's very exciting. So it's high level energy, and you have no trouble with your words. And then at the end, there's what we call finishing energy. And that's also exciting because, as you say, you see the finish line and you think this is real. It's actually going to be a book. But the middle part is where you just have to plod through it. That's plodding energy. And sometimes it feels like you're walking through molasses. It's very difficult. And I think that is where I provide the most value to my clients, because I keep them going through the whole process and encourage them and remind them that it is going to be a book at the end of all this.
And Helen, I acknowledge that middle piece. It's just plotting, and that is the toughest part, because you can't see anything yet. There's no praise. You're not done. People ask you, "How's the book coming?" You say, "Don't talk to me about the book." And yes, that's the painful part.
Yeah.
Helen, what techniques have you discovered that helps people help them get through that plotting part?
Well, I guess the main thing that helps them is just this process that they're paying me to remind them to get the words done. And that's like, it's a combination of poking and prodding and encouragement. That's what they get from me through the whole thing. And just knowing that they are going to have to report to me. And I'm actually, I seem like a very nice person, and I think I am, but I'm fairly tough. I don't pull my punches when it comes to editing and coaching. So they know that they're either going to show up with the words or they're going to have a bit of an argument about it. And it also, when there's a part where maybe somebody hasn't completed their words, and maybe they're into the second week and they're still not sure they're going to complete it, then I'll say, okay, there has to be a reason for this. So let's talk about this part specifically. Why are you having trouble with this particular chapter? And sometimes the answer is to leave it and move on to the next chapter. Many years ago when I used to teach business writing and we would be talking about reports, I used to say to people, just because you're starting at the beginning doesn't mean you have to write the first part first. Pick the part that's easiest for you and write that first. And so I say the same thing with your book. I prefer to start at the beginning and work through, but if I come to a part where I'm blocked, then I'll put it to one side and move on to the next. So that's definitely one way that you can do it. Another thing you can do is, if you're having trouble writing, actually physically writing it, you can record it. You can talk that part of it yourself. Now, I do want to mention this a little bit because it's a bit of a bugbear for me. There are many people out there on the internet they're charlatans, really. And they're saying, oh, it's really easy to write a book. You just record it and then you get a transcription and then you get it tweaked a little bit and there's your book. Well, that's not a book. That's a tweaked transcript. And it's definitely not what you want to put out there with your name on it. But the process of talking your book can be helpful. Now, some people would like to do the whole thing like that. And I said, well, that's fine. Then you get it transcribed. But remember, it's still very much a draft. however you produce those words, it's still very much a draft, and it can't be just tweaked, because especially if you're talking it, you're going to talk it like you were, if I asked you a question, we're sitting in Starbucks having a coffee, and I asked you a question about your business, you'll just tell me, and you'll say, and you'll go off in all directions. And that's fine, but it can't all go in the book. It has to be organized and made into a book. So I have nothing against people talking their book, and so if that's how they get their ideas out more easily. But just remember, it takes even more editing than it does if you put it in writing in the first place. But it is a technique that can be used, yeah.
Now, and I think you also, what I heard there, or what resonated with me, is that it's whether you're talking or whether you're writing, sometimes you write words that don't have to be there in the final book, but they keep your thoughts rolling. They keep you moving. I've noticed sometimes when I'm writing, and I'm looking for a word and it's not coming to me, so I either write a similar word or I just write XXX.
Yes.
Just so I can keep moving on, figure it out.
You don't get stuck and hung up on a word. And there's a technique that I learned from the world of fiction writing. But by the way, I don't coach people to write fiction, but I do some of it myself. And a technique I learned was that at the end of your writing session, don't finish the chapter. Finish in the middle of a chapter, and maybe even in the middle of a sentence, because then when you sit down to start again, you don't have to say, where am I going to start? You just carry on from where you left yesterday.
Oh, that's an interesting technique.
Mm-hmm.
And another technique that I've heard is when you schedule your time. And here's a mistake that I made when I first started writing. When I first started writing articles, I would write articles when I felt like it. And that was fine if I didn't have a schedule. I didn't have to meet a publisher's deadline. But then once I signed up to do a column, I now had to produce something every week. And I didn't feel like it. But I had to write something. And so what I discovered in writing the book, what was helpful was to schedule times to write regardless of how I felt. Yes. And when the time was up, don't keep going until you run out of steam, because then you always remember being out of steam, and
yes.
It's not that doesn't encourage you to sit down and write again.
Exactly. It's kind of the same principle. One thing that I did a number of books ago, I can't even remember what book it was, but I was tending to use television time to write the book. Instead of watching television, I'd work on the book, and it wasn't going anywhere. I was frustrated because I wasn't getting it out. And so I thought, right, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to set a definite time, and I'm going to change where I write. So instead of writing in my office space that I had in my home, I went to the local cafe, which was just a 10-minute walk from where I lived. This was in Toronto. And so 4 o'clock till 5 o'clock was my writing time. So I'd leave in time to get to the cafe, pick up a coffee, and sit down at 4. And I would write until 5, and I wouldn't look at any emails or anything else. I was there to write, and I would finish at 5, and I would pack up and I went home. George, that book practically wrote itself once I started doing that. So setting a time, and if you feel like it, setting a place that's different from where you do everything else. This is my writing space. That helps a lot.
That sounds like a powerful technique. So it's almost like you're programming your brain that when I'm in this space or after I've done these activities, the next thing I do is write.
Yes. Yes.
And therefore, and then it doesn't become, and then you make it a habit. So it's not work.
It's not work. Well, I wouldn't say it's not work. For some people it is, and for some people it's not. But yeah, I found it to be very, very useful. It definitely worked for me.
Helen, for people who are interested, who are thinking about, who are maybe perhaps started writing a book already, and they're getting stuck, or they don't know how to finish it, or perhaps it's something they're still thinking about, what's the best way for them to reach you?
They can reach me at helen@theexecutivescoach.com. That's Helen at I'm telling it wrong. theexecutivesbookcoach.com. And that's the best. So if they go there to the website, they'll read all about my services anyway. And I'm very happy to have an exchange of email with them to answer their questions, or even just to hop on Zoom to answer any questions that they might have and clarify things before they decide to go ahead.
That's the executives with an S, bookcoach.com, and there'll be a link to that in the description for this podcast. Helen, you've written at least 12 books so far. You've got another one you're working on. What's this one about?
This one ties in with what we've been talking about, the reasons why senior executives and seasoned executives write a book. And it is going to be a business fable. Do you remember a few years ago, there was all these fables that came out? One was the Who Moved the Cheese and the 1 Minute Manager and Patrick Lencioni's The 5 CEO Mistakes or something like that. It's in that vein. And it's a story about an executive who, first of all, doesn't write his book. He knows he has to write it, but he doesn't write it. And then through this whimsical little story, he realizes that you know, it's all going to be remembered wrong, and he's not going to be remembered at all. And therefore he has the chance to go back, and he does write the book, which changes everything. So the working title is Safeguard Your Legacy, but that would be the final title. But for now, that's what I'm working with. And it'll be a short, easy read. It's for busy people. You can probably read it in a couple of hours.
Excellent. And we can expect to see this probably around
the end of January, early February.
Okay, so we could see by February 2020, and if
2021, George.
Oh, 2021. Oh yeah, new year. Yes, let's not even talk about 2020 anymore.
No, let's not.
Helen, what you've helped executives produce their books. What's one of the best feedback or that you've heard after they've completed the book and they're holding it in their hand and they call you or they meet you, and what's one of the best compliments that you've heard from a successful book publisher?
Well, the one that I hear most is, I could never have done this without you. If I didn't have somebody like you to poke and prod me through the process, I would never have done it. And actually, one of my recent clients did a book launch a few weeks ago online, and he did a wonderful, it was amazing. And the thing went on for about an hour, and it was the book launch evening or something like that. But of course it was all virtual. But he had entertainers. He had people there doing things that you might do at a real live book launch. And he was also interviewed quite a bit. And he talked about the process, and he talked about how it was helpful to him. And they asked him, how did he come up with the title of the book? And he said, well, to be honest, I didn't. It was my editor, Helen Wilkie, who came up with the title of the book. So that was kind of nice for him to recognize that, because it was true. I mean, really, it was through our collaboration that we came up with the book. Yeah, so I think that's always the thing I like to hear, is they couldn't have done it without me, because it's true. And I could just see them struggling year after year. It's kind of like you, George, because I know that you coach people to do good presentations. And it's like when you see somebody who's a senior person and they give you their first presentation and it's terrible. So then you coach them to fixing it. And at the end, they go up there and they blow away the audience. It's the same kind of feeling that you've really helped them become the star. That's what I love.
Yes, you're right. It's a powerful feeling when you can help someone who you know they have potential, and they just need guidance. They need coaching along the way. And when you see them achieve that success, you think, wow, I made a difference for that person.
Yes, exactly. And that's why one reason why I prefer the coaching to the ghostwriting, because the ghostwriting, it's still your book. It's still your information, and I can't write it without you. So it really is still your book. But I don't get that feeling of accomplishment that I helped guided them through to doing it themselves.
I suppose in some way it's like a parent watching a child who you've just taught them a new skill, and they go, Mommy, Daddy, look at me. And you think, wow, they got it. They got it.
That's it. They've got it. Yes.
Helen, what an appropriate note to end on. My guest today, Helen Wilkie, the Executives Book Coach, calling in from Buenos Aires, Argentina, helping people safeguard their legacy. If you like what you heard, remember to like, comment, and share this podcast. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.